And we were gonna kick things off. Matthias, I don't know if you want to take it with a debrief. So on Saturday we had a really powerful event dedicated to the LASAR app. So why don't you go for it, Matthias?
Yeah, folks. Again, my name is Matthias. I use he, him pronouns at Stop LAPD Spying. And just a quick run through of the agenda today. We are kicking things off with a kind of review of everything we talked about at our youth surveillance town hall on Saturday. We're going to be talking about some next steps we want to take, and we're also going to be hearing from some of our comrades at PYM. And so real quick, I'm just going to pull up our slideshow presentation and go over it. Um, just screen share. If you'll give me just a second, friends. And so, yeah, on Saturday we convened at the Southern California Library. Really great space, folks should check out. And the topic of discussion was LAUSD youth surveillance, specifically this app LASAR, which stands for Los Angeles Schools Anonymous Reporting. And so, one thing we've been talking about is how this app, while it sounds like it's something sophisticated and new, it actually is in line with the architecture of surveillance, the tools that it's another facet of the architecture of surveillance, another tool that kind of feeds this information sharing environment that the coalition has been talking about. And we at the coalition, I'm sure a lot of the folks here who are plugged in with our work know that we're staunchly abolitionist, right? We're based in community, we're community led. So sophistications like the LASAR app, we've never seen as solutions. And in fact, we're not trying to fix these programs or tools in order to make them better or less harmful. We see them as in line with the long lineage of settler colonial violence and the pursuit of control, commodification, of Black and Indigenous bodies that we've seen in this country. And so that's kind of where we even grounded this app to begin with, right? And, this current fight against LAUSD's app is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. And so these are just a few of kind of that lineage of policing and surveillance that we see this app as a part of. So the way LASAR operates is just some background. Is it's a reporting app, plain and simple. It's an app anybody can download. You don't need to be an LAUSD parent, teacher, student to download this app and report a student. Um, and that's not new. If anything, in most ways, this app is replicating a program by the LAPD, right? A totally different entity called Suspicious Activity Reporting Program. And there's a bunch of programs within LAPD that promote this notion of behavioral surveillance, right? This idea that you can monitor someone for behaviors, and these will be indicators of future activity. And we know it's been widely discredited, and yet it's still used as a rationalization for racial profiling, for the targeting of the same communities that are always targeted, right? Black, brown, poor folk. And so, you know, with the LASAR app specifically, again, we immediately clocked that this is replicating the suspicious activity reporting program from LAPD, and more so the community deputization facet of this program called iWatch, which also included an app called iWatch LA. And this app was an app that anybody can download. You can still download it, iWatch LA, and report suspicious behaviors to LAPD. And some of the behaviors they name are, looking through binoculars, are asking the store for their hours, just really generally innocuous behaviors. And you, the Office of the Inspector General actually did an audit of the suspicious activity reporting program and the reports received through the iWatch LA app. And sure enough, Black people were disproportionately impacted. Sure enough, a majority of the reports on Black and brown people were from majority white neighborhoods. So just one of the things we want to uplift is the mechanics of the iWatch LA app and of the SAR program are identical to the LASAR app. And so we've been saying it's going to replicate the outcomes too, the same racist outcomes. And so here's just a screen grab of some of the categories, and actually some additional context. I'm sorry to speak out of order, but the categories kind of listed, or some of the the behaviors listed within the iWatch LA app and the SARS Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, were more clearly racially motivated, were more clearly anti-Muslim, anti-terrorist, right? Now, if we look at the categories listed here for the LASAR app, there's still that kind of component of, threat of planned school attack, right? This notion of property damage, this notion of human trafficking, like categories that are meant to incite fear, right? These are different kinds of boogeymen in so many ways. But what else is interesting is, there's this kind of suggestion that the LASAR app would address substance abuse problems within the drugs category here, mental health crises over here, school safety, and that's a more recent sophistication. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that trajectory kind of took place within the realm of youth surveillance in a second. But I think it's worth noting that the mechanics of this app are that students and community members outside of schools are now empowered, and actually, it's being promoted as a school safety tool, are empowered to snitch on other students, right? To share information. And one thing to note about the SAR program, the iWatch LA app, the LASAR app is, well, specifically with LASAR, this information goes straight to LASPD, right? There's no notion of a caregiver addressing these issues, right? It goes straight to the police. But as we know, this is named explicitly with SAR and iWatch LA, that information doesn't stop with police, right? That information is then shared to a fusion center, a data hub, a center where federal agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, have access to that information, which then, puts our undocumented youth at risk. But we know that, that like they're not going to stop there, right? It also puts undocumented family members of these students at risk for targeting by ICE. So that's one thing we've kind of identified in this broader information sharing environment. And next up. And so this is a little bit about, this is a separate program called PATH, Providing Alternatives to Hinder Extremism. And this is an LAPD program. So LASAR is an LAUSD app that works specifically with LASPD, which is Los Angeles School Police Department. PATH is an LAPD program still focused on kind of targeting youth, but it's LAPD. And so the PATH program, which stands for Providing Alternatives to Hinder Extremism, was pretty explicitly racist, was pretty explicitly anti-Muslim, and oriented toward this whole notion of addressing terrorism and extremism. Obviously, there was almost resounding opposition to this app from the community, right? Through UTLA spoke out against it, and against the framework called Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention that funded it. PYM obviously has been writing against this for a real long time. A bunch of orgs push back against it. And so we did see kind of a pivot from this kind of focus on extremism and terrorism and racist lines to, and I'm just going to skip this slide here, but to this focus on mental health. And that becomes important when we kind of think of who's being used, who's being deputized in the PATH program. So I should speak a little more about its mechanics. The PATH program specifically, it's not an app, right? What it is it's a training where the LAPD, trains, I think the set number is 500 we have right now, but who knows how big it's going to get. Educators, school therapists, counselors, the people, that students should feel the most comfortable with, most vulnerable with, to look for risk factors for extremism. And so we've seen in the most recent PATH trainings that these risk factors for extremism or violent behavior have kind of shifted from, this anti-terrorist more racist, anti-Muslim language, to, I don't know if you can read some of these lines, but these are some of the things they identified from their path training: having an abusive childhood, suffered from depression, attempted suicide, evidence of being bullied, suicidal ideation, hated his life in the world. In one line, they pointed out a kid just being weird. So we already see an environment being cultivated for students expressing normal things, right? For being a teenager, normal problems, that being categorized as an indicator of criminal behavior down the line, right? And so this is something that preceded the release of the LASAR app, but very much informs, what the LASAR app would come and do. And then I want to invite Michelle. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how this might kind of impact mental health workers, school psychologists, or school therapists, anything like that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matios. Yeah, I think kind of the way that we are thinking about the logics of surveillance and policing as they've been continuous across path, but also the ways we can expect that LASAR will continue to reproduce those same forms of really surveillance and social control. Yeah, I think we should be really wary of the ways that mental health professionals who are, tasked with providing care are also being really deployed to continue surveilling and policing and sort of in their clinical work, which is, confidential with students, to actually be a pipeline of information to the police. And I think the way that LASAR really focuses on, the content of what it's collecting, which is like physical descriptions of people and GPS coordinates. Like it's so much more focused on actually surveilling people rather than really understanding incidents and context and actually providing follow-up care. So yeah, I think definitely folks in any sort of mental health capacity or just in general being tasked with care should really pay attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And I'm just going to run through this real quick, and maybe we can open it up for questions. But one thing I did also want to flag here that's not underlined, but when we think about who has access to this app, right? Who can report any student? It's really anybody, right? Anybody can weaponize this app to direct students to police. And I think it's worth being conscious of the political landscape in which this app is being introduced, right? One in which anti-queer and anti-trans protesters feel empowered to protest outside of LAUSD, right? Or outside the Glendale School Board. And so, that may seem like an outlier viewpoint, but even here within LAPD's own documentation, their own training of path, we see that gender identity is struggling with gender identity is something that's identified as a risk factor for violent behavior down the line. And so we see kind of this concerted effort to again criminalize just problems. And so yeah, Nadia, I know I saw you jump in. I'm pretty sure I did. I don't know if you want to touch on kind of the mandate. Well, if you want to introduce yourself, but also touch on the mandated reporting aspect of this.
Hello, hi. Yes, I'm Nadia. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for breaking that down for us. This was something we also provided at the town hall, which I did join a little late, so I'm not sure if you already talked about that, but yeah, so with the mandated reporting, this is something we know is already problematic here in the US. The mandated reporting system, it is not effective, and it has historically targeted Black and Brown families, right? I mean, the coalition has a full report just about DCFS, right, Department of Child and Family Services, and just its intense, harsh impact, especially on the Black community and on Black and Brown families. And so, this is already problematic, right? And what connects to this is in England, the program Prevent, which is a model for these programs we're talking about, right? Like CVE, PVE, but also really the LASAR app as well. Prevent is already made teachers mandated reporters. So, mandated reporters for things like mental health issues in this sense, and not sort of what we would do here in the US, like someone's going to harm themselves, but some of the things Matios was just talking about, right? Mandated reporters for people being too much into their culture, being too angry. So, so unfortunately, the US has tended to follow England's lead with some of these programs. And so we're wanting to take this on before it does get to that point, because we do see it heading there. So this is kind of a very explicit connection we're seeing. And yeah, so that is, yeah, so that would be the connection.
Thank you, Nadia. I think I've just got one more slide and then we can open it up for questions. And so, yeah, this is just an image of what the state calls the information sharing environment. We call it the stalker state. And these are, the varying entry points for data gathering, but how they're shared, right? And we see, more innocuous kind of points of entry here, like the DMV and hospitals, seemingly. But we also see, the Department of Justice and the FBI. And I think this is an important note to end on, because this is the intention of the app, right? It's to facilitate this information gathering to further, like, more easily criminalize youth down the line. And we're still doing research and finding out more about this app, but what we do know, and I think what kind of reinforces this fact, is that this was funded by a DOJ grant. Like this came from the Department of Justice, right? And so we see here a federal push to kind of build to further build out these mechanisms for information gathering. And in addition to all that, it's just also cultivating a culture of snitching, right? And so we're fighting back against it. We have some next steps we want to talk about, but I think I'd like to pause here and open it up for any questions from folks or anything anybody wants to add to any of this. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Well, thank you, Matios. And then Alex, I saw your hand, yeah. I just want to point out that students with disabilities already, like, I work for Disability Rights California, and I know that there's like a whole youth practice group who, I don't work in that unit and it's like very big, but I know that there's like already like so many problems and so many like so much intervention that's needed just for disabled children to go to school. And I mean, children also with invisible disabilities, I mean children whose behavior are mischaracterized as violent or a problem, because the classrooms are built in a way that doesn't really allow for children to, maybe sit on the floor if they need it, or things of that sort. So a lot of times classrooms are built in very like ableist structures. Like, I can't sit in a chair for a long time. If I do, my head starts hurting. I can if I need it. Hi, honey. So I just want to just uplift and thank you, Matios, and all involved, but just, like, this is obviously could be weaponized. And I want to be respectful of the time. So I'll pass to Alex.
Thank you for that. I had some questions around messaging. Some of the things that I've been bringing up in our conversations is how random searches did not reveal material risks. It just criminalized kids and traumatized them. Also, the spike in suicide rates and mental health challenges among teenagers and online bullying. It feels like those are important elements of this as well. Is that in your messaging around it, specifically to parents, if you've discussed that, am I on the right track with those as elements to be concerned about, how it's fitting together holistically with what's happening at LAUSD, Black Student Achievement Plan, defunding LASPD, and then they're finding new ways to bring themselves into it. But the larger point is we've already had surveillance of our teens over many years through random searches. It didn't reveal any security risks that were material. We haven't found that it's useful at all, and it criminalizes them and targets, especially if we're thinking about mental health challenges, as there's an increase of that with our kids. This just seems like compounding harm. Am I on the right track with that messaging, and is there anything to add to it?
Yeah, Nadia, Akil, Michelle, I'd invite any one of you to address that.
Yeah, I love that messaging. I love the idea of tying LASAR to the movement, really historic and successful movement to kick police out of the schools and wrest some of those resources back for Black youth, for youth that really need those resources. And then here they come getting money from the federal government to try to get youth to police each other, and then to try to come back in the schools waving the app in the air and saying, see, they asked us to come. They asked us, these are the reports from these youth that want us to come and police them. So I think that is a good point.
And Alex, it's something the students brought up too. So even the Fairfax High School students that we spoke with, immediately their reaction was like, one, they're the ones that brought up like, well, if you really wanted to bully someone, you could just mass report them, and send them to police. And then the other thing they brought up is that when they talk about the problems within their school, whether it's fights or anything else, or like this app, they know this app isn't going to fix it. This isn't a solution. So I think it just speaks to how like spot on you are, that even students are echoing that same point. Hamid, I see you with your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something and thank you all for having this conversation. And as Martios was sharing that this app has been built on the old National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative, which includes the See Something, Say Something and other programs as well. There was an interesting, very many times these federal and state institutions and government institutions are just like garnishing on what already is being done. But there was an interesting report that came out back about 20 years ago from the Academy, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and that was on counterterrorism intelligence gathering, and particularly looking at behavioral surveillance and data mining. And that's exactly what this has been built on, is behavioral surveillance. And it was a pretty long report, but I mean, one, they completely debunked this notion that no, behavioral surveillance is not an indicator, because it's all very relative and depending as to what informs and triggers behavior. But what they also did a warning was that once people know that they're being watched like that, then people tend to alter their behavior. And the more they alter their behavior, the more suspicious they come through. So in a sense, things like this even take it further, where somebody starts kind of like, just acting in their own, trying to act normally, where you just, whatever that means, normal or not normal, but then they appear more suspicious, which kind of just puts them more at the risk of being deemed as a potential criminal or what have you, or, just exactly the way suspicious behavior is defined, that observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. So that's exactly how this is being framed. So I just wanted to throw that in there too, that we're just even more, it's a more emotional harm to students as well, thinking that somebody else is going to call me out if I'm just acting in a particular way or sharing my life.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hamid. Any other questions from folks?
Yeah, I just wanted to add actually too, and I think something you'd said, Alex, kind of made me think of this as well, just the the district sort of pushing all these different initiatives, and this anti-bullying, right? So obviously, yes, like we don't want our kids to be bullied. I mean, right? There's that goes without saying, but we know that bullying has been kind of now become a justification for programs, right? Sort of policing programs, criminalizing programs, and not actually resolving the issue. And then yeah, so with LASAR, a lot of my students and a lot of students we've talked to, they're like, that's the first thing that comes to their head. They're like, Miss, this is going to lead to a lot of bullying, right? And I'm like, exactly, right? So I think yeah, so I think it's like it's yeah, in addition to all the other problems, and it's not even sort of, yeah, it's going against what even the very district is trying to supposedly fight against, you know. But yeah.
Cool. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat to our zine, and we invite folks to share this with literally anyone and everyone.
And just on, and Matias, you might have already said this, but yeah, just a shout out the Fairfax students, group of them made this zine. So yeah, I know they're not here right now, but yeah, they just spent a lot of time researching and created this badass zine.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. But I also want to uplift kind of some of our next action steps to fight this back, right? Because we know that this is something the school district is going to roll out a little more aggressively. We've seen already some messaging kind of come out, you know, inviting educators to use it. And so one thing we're already doing, or we're in the process of getting documentation from LAUSD about this app, who created it, you know, what proposals went into getting that Department of Justice grant that funded it. And so one thing we have coming is research, but also one thing we can kind of move forward with is gathering more questions, right? More bits of information about the app that we're curious about, whether it's about its function or whether about how it's been used so far. That those are bits of information we can get through public records requests. So I'd invite folks to just chime in right now if there's anything you want to know about it, or you can also email us at stoplapdspying@gmail.com to plug in and with our work groups to kind of craft that. The other thing we're doing is we're showing up at LAUSD on the 17th and making public comment against this app, right? We're demanding that it's discontinued immediately, and we're kind of uplifting the harms we know are going to be caused by this app. And so we'll have a call to action toolkit in the upcoming days, but we want folks to show up at the meeting on the 17th of October. The meeting starts at 1 o'clock. We're asking folks to assemble at 3:30 to make public comment. And so there'll be more messaging around that. Another thing we're doing is we have an organizational letter, which I will drop in the chat right now in just a second. And so if you are with an organization that, you know, fights for social justice or fights against the police, or even, you know, fights for students, we'd ask that you endorse this letter. And yeah, this is something we want to show to the Board of Education and say, hey, look, these are organizations that represent, you know, the community of LA in so many ways, even especially impacted aspects of our community, and say, you know, we want this app gone. So let me drop that in the chat. And lastly, you know, we invite folks to kind of think about spaces that you feel need to hear about this app if they haven't already. I know a lot of folks are connected with other parents, other educators, other students. And so one thing that I found jarring, you know, in even discussing this, is how many teachers, students have just haven't heard of it, right? Like just didn't know this app existed. And, you know, that's dangerous in its own way. So if there are spaces, whether they're neighborhood council meetings, whether they're just, you know, parent organizations, let us know. We can we can pull through and share some of this analysis. And that's the organizational letter in the chat right there. Any questions about any of those next steps or anything folks want to add?
How, like, a question is there any, like, what are like, how can I support as an individual, and then how can DRC support as an organization? Because this affects disabled children, and we're also involved with, like, like, there's just a lot, like immigration. You just touched on, like, a lot. So, like, but I also, above all, I'm a parent first and foremost. So as an individual, how can I support these actions as Vanessa Ramos? And also, what are ways for DRC and other orgs to show support? Is there a sign on, like, what are ways?
Yeah, so I think just quickly on the DRC and that organizational sign-on letter, we're asking organizations to endorse. So if folks get down with that messaging and want this app gone, we just ask that organizations endorse. On a personal level, and I'm hoping Akil, Nadia, and Michelle, y'all can add to this, but I think just telling folks, right? Like so much of organizing, Hamid always says, is relationship building. And so, we have vast networks of relationships, people we know who will be impacted by this, right? Like surveillance is all encompassing in that way, that we know that everyone will be hurt by this or by the existence of this app. So just tell folks, I think, share that information, share that zine, and yeah, try to educate as many as your folks that like it in service of self-defense, right? We're not fear-mongering with any of this. It's so we know we're aware, we can take care of our youth, and we can fight back against these systems. But I want to open it up to other folks to kind of reply to that on an individual level. What can we do?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll add is, yeah, I think talking to people and, and that's something I feel like that at the town hall, was surfacing. We had students and parents who came, and really got like amped up to get involved. And so I think just, getting parents to talk to each other, because, I think, like, at least what the parents were saying is they're really worried about this, and they're really worried that the conflicts, that even between a parent and a kid or different kids, right? How the state just will never understand the intricacies of that, and sure as hell an app won't, right? So yeah, I think just and we're gonna sort of keep building this fight is, like, yeah, just kind of taking note as you're talking to parents, like, okay, which families would like to and have the capacity to maybe also get involved sort of in a bigger fight, maybe who has the capacity to just spread the word, right? So that's kind of something for me, like, I've been kind of just taking note of as I've been talking to, like, families and teachers and counselors, like, okay, who maybe doesn't have capacity to get involved but is down to, like, spread the word, who does have capacity to get involved. So I know personally that's something I'm just kind of taking my own mental note of. So, like, as we do start building towards actions, right? For example, showing up next week at the school board, who are maybe like families and teachers and counselors we can call to go out there, and maybe who we can sort of count on to just continue spreading the word. Yeah, that would be the only thing I would add on the personal note.
Yeah, get in there, Hamid.
Yeah, I think I appreciate Vanessa lifting that. So maybe just thinking a little bit more about the role that the Disability Rights California can play. I think they can play a very key role. I mean, this is directly an assault on young people who are dealing with disabilities. You are now providing a vehicle and a tool to now take it beyond the cruelty and just like, just a lot of stuff that happens. So I think in a sense, it's way more than just an issue of our invasion of privacy. This is the intent to cause harm. This is to really traumatize, and then look, I mean, we've all, I was 15, 16, 14, just we've all been there, and how we act, and not to just say anything about youth, because they're beautiful young people, but there's also, like, within a setting, just making fun of somebody who has a disability, making mockery of young people, and then almost goading them or trapping them to respond. And the minute the response comes in, immediately it's criminalized. Like, that we weren't doing anything, we were just talking, and he's just like that, or she's just like that, or they're like that. I mean, I think of children with the trans youth, just queer trans youth, just a walking target, and how this thing can be weaponized. So I think DRC, I mean, the only thing we ask of organizations is that don't seek reform. Don't go down that road, that, well, this can be done in a kinder, gentler way, because no, there is no such thing. I mean, we just need to abolish and dismantle it. So I think for DRC to really just weigh in, we would love for DRC to weigh in really, really heavily, but just kind of follow the lead as to, like, that how are we moving towards dismantling this program, because this is a very, very, just as Alex started earlier about random searches and various other things, this is a very dangerous path that we have taken, extremely dangerous path, because it's opening up, if this succeeds, just who knows where this techno solutionism is going to go.
Cool. Any other questions from folks? Insights, thoughts?
And I want to, oh, sorry, Alex and I always speak at the, Alex, you go. I've already, I know, right? We're on it. We're like, bam. Okay, I did. Yeah, you go.
First.
All right. Okay. Hamid and Matios and all really, and all, or like who, like, anyone involved. Like, I want to be very careful that I don't ever misspeak. Is it, would you feel comfortable if I, like, do you want to talk to because I could ask my director of public policy if we could sign on, as an organization. One of the things that I also think in building power is, would you be open to speaking to, like, the folks at the youth practice group, because this directly affects them, but I don't want to speak in a manner that then initiates, like, unintended consequences or harms, because so I would feel most comfortable if some of you would speak directly. Would that be, may I include you in an email?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we do regularly. I mean, we do workshops and introductions to kind of our war on youth stuff all the time. So we're organizers, we can talk for hours. So you can definitely connect us.
I'll email this question too, in case it's helpful to have it just in writing, but I know with, the National Coming Out Day this week being recognized, and the increased hysteria around leave our kids alone and things like that, in parents have the opportunity to opt their children out of assemblies or certain lessons if they want to. While of course that's in the opposite direction of what we're moving in, we want to support all of those things. But it's interesting to me that my question about the app would be, could schools opt out of this? Because the district has been very clear that parents can opt out. And so I would like to know if parents can also opt out of this as a school. And I'll email that.
Yeah, please do, Alex. I'd love to explore what that looks like. That's incredibly intriguing. Does that mean, your like a child's information can't be gathered? Yeah, I think that's something definitely worth exploring. That's a really great idea.
Yeah, and I think now would be a good time to, like, sort of, if we're, because since technically the app is optional, right? Like, so if a principal is trying to push on the school, I think, yeah, families sort of pushing back would mean a lot, like for individual schools too. Mhm.
Cool. Any other questions or comments from folks? And Alex I think we'll definitely be in touch to talk about what that can look like, whether it's a call-in campaign or anything else. If not, we wanna yeah, I want to thank everybody for kind of plugging into that work. Again, we'll have some graphics and information we can share out regarding the October 17th LAUSD meeting. Again, we're asking folks to show up at 3:30 to make public comment. You have to sign up for public comment the day before. I want to thank our partners at Students Deserve for helping us work out the mechanics of the school board meeting. But yeah, and also we're going to pass around this organizational letter. I dropped it in the chat. If a link is more helpful, I can send that. Just DM me in the chat, and I can do that. And yeah, let your organizations know, let your people know, and we're gonna keep fighting. And with that, unless Akil, did you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay if I give a couple things of transition, unless we're staying on the topic?
We're not. Yeah, no, I was actually gonna give it to you. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in just a second, I'm going to welcome Ibrahim from Palestinian Youth Movement to talk a little bit about what's going on in Palestine and the work of PYM. But I wanted to kind of also outline some of the direct connections here. So one thing that we've talked about in the coalition often is that tools and tactics from different facets of the police state get recycled into other facets, especially when it comes to tools and tactics developed in imperialist wars abroad being adapted to be used on Black Americans here and vice versa. We talked about how the police actually took, the LAPD took Marines on drive-throughs to show them how they do gang policing in South Central to help them with their occupation in the Middle East. So it's been a constant exchange. And one of the things that we see specifically with the PATH program, for example, the PATH program initially was called Renew, Recognizing Extremist Networks Early Warnings. And we actually know that Renew, the precursor to the PATH program, even though it was founded under the CVE program, was actually adapted from a partnership between LAPD and the Department of Mental Health that was organized to surveil and police unhoused people within LA. So you see the way that policing of unhoused people gets used for the targeting of Muslims and Arabs and others under the CVE program. And then you see that coming back full circle, the tools and tactics developed in this framework of war and terror being used against Black Americans. And one thing that with these reporting apps is that this is not the first time, as much as talked about, there was iWatch, but reporting apps have also been pioneered and promoted in LA by Zionist organizations, such as the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Simon Wiesenthal Center received a grant from the state of California. It was actually federal money from the Department of Homeland Security that was cycled through the state of California's Department of Homeland Security, and their specifically their Office of Emergency Services, and then given to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which some of you might know the term the Museum of Tolerance. A lot of youth are taken to the Museum of Tolerance on field trips or different visits through schools all around Southern California. So they created, with this grant money, they created an app called Combat Hate. Combat Hate they were there then promoting that to youth to submit reports on hate that they see. And they even talked about hate incidents, which are not even necessarily hate crimes, but hate incidents. It turns out I actually saw this. There's a CBS article from 2014 that even before the PVE grant, Simon Wiesenthal Center was developing a combat hate app and working with LAPD Police Chief Michael Downing. They premiered it in at the Museum of Tolerance itself, this combat hate app. So they were trying to do this app since back then. And just like with Path, when there was all this resistance to the overt racism of, so it wasn't just this app or aimed at K through 12 was very vague about what it deemed as hate. But Simon Wiesenthal Center, it's still to this day, if you look at the App Store, they have another app called Combat Hate U, stands for university. And it's geared towards university students, and it explicitly is about reporting incidents they call anti-Israel incidents. They even say that in the app itself. They say anti-Semitism and anti-Israel incidents. So the point I'm trying to say is that just like the PATH program started off explicitly overtly racist, and then due to community pushback, it became folded into a broad, neutral sounding framework of violence prevention. So we see that now we have these apps like LASAR, which we know who it's going to target, but they're saying the way they describe it is that, oh, this is about school shooters, this is about drugs, this is about mental health. Inevitably, it's going to target, as we talked about, as Matios laid out, Black youth, queer youth, trans youth, disabled youth, unhoused youth, Muslim youth, Arab youth, Palestinian youth, immigrant youth. And I wanted to outline those connections as we just as I pass it to Ibrahim, because everything, all of this stuff is connected. The policing, the tactics that are developed specifically to crack down on anti-Zionism will then be used against other social movements, other causes, and vice versa. And with that, Ibrahim, if you're available to give us a little bit of an update and background on what's going on in Palestine.
Hi guys, thanks so much for being here. I want to provide like a brief update on events, but also just from listening and learning from you all during this meeting, I don't know, I'm also curious, like, is there, like, would you like to, for example, ask questions, or if there's things that you want to know about surveillance and the issues you've been discussing? I'm also happy to like try to answer those to the best of my ability. This is going to be like substantially different from what we've been talking about, so that's why I just want to preface it that way. But if you have questions, I would love to take questions you have. I'm just gonna talk for a little bit, and then I would love to hear your thoughts. First, just sort of to give you an update of events on the ground. I don't know how much you all know. I'm sure you know something, if you've been reading the news in the past few days. But essentially, a couple of days ago, there was a massive breakthrough of the fence that essentially the fence that hems in Gaza, Gaza being the strip of land in occupied Palestine that is, under the total external control of Israel. The fence was broken through by resistance fighters within Gaza, and essentially people were returning to land outside of Gaza that they are from. So most people in Gaza are not from there. They're from villages and towns that are surrounding the strip. Most people there are refugees and have not been able to return, often to places that are, just miles away from them since 1948, or in some cases 1967. And since 2007, since those elections that occurred in which Hamas won those elections, there's been collective punishment imposed on Gaza, essentially sealing it off from the world. So since it's been now about 17 years, the 2 million Palestinians who are inside of Gaza are essentially under siege. The only 2 entry and exit points into and out of the strip are controlled. One is controlled by Israel, the other by Egypt, which collaborates with Israel on all security. and strictly rations, you know, the food, medicine, and building supplies that are allowed in, so that it's not able to really economically develop beyond a very rudimentary stage, if that makes sense. So we've already seen what we saw a few days ago. It's not the first time something like this has been attempted. It's just the first time it's succeeded. You know, there was something called the Great Return March in 2018 and 2019, where thousands of Palestinians were peacefully walking to the fence and protesting there, attempting to do what was just done a few days ago, which was break out of what is essentially a prison and try to return home. The many hundreds of Palestinians were killed during these demonstrations that occurred 5 years ago. And there's been a lot of echoing of and sort of alluding to these protesters, these martyrs, now that, you know, this has occurred. Of course, as you've seen, there's been a rapid escalation in fighting. We're seeing the resistance front in the West Bank also we've already seen it become much more organized in the past 2 years, but we're seeing that also become much more active and coordinated with Gaza. We're also seeing from the north, South Lebanon, which was formerly occupied by Israel for 20 years. All of these areas are currently have ongoing resistance to what's happening. I guess like I said, this is hard to sort of relate to the topic of surveillance, but I think if your interest is in, so I'm happy to talk about either what's going on in Palestine, if you want to know more about that, or if you're more interested in like a movement, tactics, like surveillance of Palestine and Palestinians in the United States, surveillance of our movements or of Arabs and Muslims, you know, I'm happy to talk about either of those subjects. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions or things that you'd like to ask, you know, before I continue.
I got a question,
Sure,
Ibrahim.
thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, so now the mainstream narrative is that this is an act of terrorism. This is where Hamas came in, and there were people were peacefully at a music festival. There was a rave going on. They were also celebrating a religious holiday as well, and you know, just so they had a whole bunch of GoPros that they were using, cameras, and now they are kind of just making mockery, parading young women that they have taken hostage, and they have taken other people hostage as well. And you know, this is something like, you know, because everything started on Sunday. I mean, this is how it is. The whole history is being shared as if like this started on Sunday. Now, so I think for the benefit, I mean, obviously, you know, just I'm also very cautious that not to put people whose families and land and you know, just to re-traumatize and talking about it, because it has been traumatic for, like, you know, just for communities for the last 70 plus years. But just wanted to see hear your thoughts, or anybody else from PYM, as to what has been like, how are you responding to, or however, like, what message do you have for communities, like, you know, just where you're constantly being fed this mainstream kind of like this information constantly being bombarded with people, and then unadulterated evil. That's what Biden said in his speech today when he made his comments about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So essentially, what's occurred is, again, like I provided sort of the larger context. I provided the context of, you know, what Gaza is, like how people are sort of trapped there, how it's a prison, and how most people in Gaza are from areas around it. So when people are breaking out of it, people are breaking out of a situation where they've been for decades under military occupation, brutal military occupation. And certainly this is war in the sense that, you know, we are at wartime. So you know, the images that the images that you see, first of all, in the US media are largely focused in one direction. I mean, that's something that I think most people probably know. So the images of the music festival are something that have really permeated and been in a lot of popular media. The question that you had was essentially what our response is to that, to these sort of images we've been seeing on the news, or is your question like, could you just specify kind of what you wanted me to comment on with regards to like what to those things?
Well, I mean, just when you're hearing just like, obviously this is a community meeting, right? So a lot of folks are walking in with what they're hearing on the news as well. So I think this is also an opportunity as well to how do we counter this very mainstream narrative that is being built, because they're not speaking about an open air prison for the longest time. They're not speaking about people constantly being their land forcefully taken away, and this is a settler colony. They're not hearing, the conversation around, like, generally how, we have these conversations, just really kind of, just completely exposing the fuckery of what has been going on by the U.S. and Israel and the Zionist state. So the apartheid state that exists. So so that is completely off limit, and it's further being garnished immediately through this victim lens that Israel is a democracy. And yeah, they're right now going through this whole thing about judicial reforms and things like that. However, they're a democracy and people have rights and this, that, and the other. So in a sense, so it's not really even maybe a direct question to you, Ibrahim. It's more or less like helping us understand and helping folks who are just listening to, or maybe with what they're gathering from the news, like what is the reality on the ground.
Sure. I think the reality on the ground is an extremely uncomfortable one. It's hard for me to talk to people who, because again, I part of the problem is this was a last minute ask, so I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know if I'm in community with people. I don't know what people's politics are. So it's like kind of confusing, but part of the truth is uncomfortable in the sense that we're talking about a case of decolonization, right? So it's not comfortable to talk about the fact that people are paragliding out of a prison and into occupied land that has essentially been occupied by people, not only of European descent, but largely from places that are not occupied Palestine. After being in these conditions for decades and being bombed relentlessly for decades, people don't play nice. That just doesn't tend to be how decolonization works. I mean, we talk about decolonization in an academic way, as sort of a metaphor, or as a meditation routine, or these things people do like self-care, but when we're talking about decolonizing land, yes, like that is a process that unfortunately is a violent process. I mean, that because of the violence that caused this to be necessary in the first place. This is why I brought up, actually, it's a good point. This is why I brought up the Great Return March, because it's not that there have been many attempts at sort of a pacifist attempt to break out of what Gaza is, right? And those attempts have resulted in sort of massacres. So, I would just caution us against the sort of racist tropes and imagery that you often hear with regards to, so with regards to Palestinians, like landing at a music festival, this particular image is, I'm sure, the one that's being most weaponized because it very much caters to American white fears of terrorism. You're enjoying like a nice evening, and then in comes a terrorist and all this stuff. And you're right that someone without context is going to see that and feel that way. There's not much that we can do in 60 seconds to get someone not to think that way. But when you understand the larger context, you start to see that, like, yes, it is uncomfortable, but at the same time, these are people who were forced into war, who were forced to resist, who really either have to choose between doing that or being annihilated, because that's sort of what the situation has been for many years. And it's really hard to challenge that narrative in the media. I mean, we have many good people in our organization who've been trying in the news. We've had people in the past 2 days be on many like news channels and and do interviews with, we have someone now on some YouTube show that has a lot of viewers, just trying to like challenge a lot of these framings, but it's really hard to do because Americans tend to view this through the lens of something like 9/11, and they don't tend to ask larger questions about why are people responding the way they are, and what is the context in which this violence is occurring. And of course, without that context, this completely seems like senseless violence and terror. So I understand that, and I appreciate your question. I think it's important to engage this stuff because it is really where the larger community is at. Most people we live with are not, aware, educated, or know these things. So yeah. Okay, Matthias and then Vanessa.
I just want to say thank you very much, Ibrahim. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that response, Ibrahim. I had a question about well, we know like, advocating or fighting for Palestinian liberation, even here in the US, and even like being down with anti-Zionism, like folks are met with backlash, right? Like folks are doxxed all the time or added to Canary Mission. I guess, do you have any examples of how that's kind of like that type of retaliation surveillance has amplified in the past few days, kind of in response, or yeah, what are folks anticipating in some ways?
That's a really good question. I just want to like make sure, do people know what Canary Mission is here? Maybe not. Okay, so Canary Mission, I mean, I'm sure you all are activists, right? So you know what doxing is, right? Like to dox somebody. Okay, so Canary Mission is essentially a doxing platform. It is like sort of a far right platform that on its webpage says that it's devoted to fighting hatred of Israel, the USA, and terrorism. But when you look at the database, what they essentially do is it's filled with Arab and Muslim college students from around the country. They focus really on college campuses. And then they have very prominent, scary, like Nazi or alt-right figures, people like Nick Fuentes or well, now Kanye West, just people who are like saying horrible things, right? And the goal is to sort of intimidate people to not speak at all about Palestine so that they don't end up on the website. Because if you end up on the website, this is something that comes up as soon as an employer Googles your name, right? The first thing they're going to see when they Google your name is they're going to put some crazy thing that you support terrorism, that you support something that you don't support. And then it's going to be much harder for you to get a job. So Canary Mission for years has been doxing our activists. It's a big reason why we've had to really work on security culture. We've had to work on like, like how to say things and also like how to protect yourself and your community, because often we get young people, we get teenagers, people who don't yet understand like actually this is the correct way to view the situation and who just say things out of emotion. And then once they become adults, that digital footprint is still there and it will haunt them for the rest of their life. So this is the reality that we're dealing with Canary Mission. It is very scary, but we've done a lot to be able to sort of minimize its effects. Insofar as like helping people get it like way back to like page 12 of the search results, or just sort of protecting our organization so that it's much more difficult to be infiltrated by people from Canary Mission who come to our events and try to like pretend like they want to get to know us and then just collect our information to dox people. Again, I feel like when it comes to the subject of doxing, I can imagine if I'm in the room with like leftists or people who organize, like I think everyone kind of gets that if you do organizing, you're at risk of being doxed by, these sort of far right troll people. So it is something unfortunate. As far as like things in the past few weeks, really I am proud of us. I feel like all the big orgs, we've gotten a lot better with our security culture for our membership. Unfortunately, we do have to have like kind of extensive processes to like onboard people to our organizations to make sure that we don't have someone in the org who, sometimes we do have to sacrifice like bandwidth to be able to hold what we have, because all it takes is one person who infiltrates an organization to sort of bring it down, right? So we've built good security culture. We're working really hard with that. There's only so much we can do, but we also have cases of people who have been doxxed. I mean, honestly, most people who've been doxxed, if not almost everybody, has never run into issues to the extent that they weren't able to hold down a job. It's just that it becomes harder. Or it's that if you, for example, are Palestinian and you want to go to Palestine, the IDF uses Canary Mission. Like they'll find your name and then they'll deny you entry. So these are the kind of price that people have to pay if they choose to be vocal. But ultimately, people are vocal and they're still able to live their lives mostly normally. So it's really a silencing, a sort of fear tactic kind of thing, if that makes sense. I think, okay, was there, Vanessa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to like thank you. And also, you know, the more that I've been learning and reading, like the more that I'm like what I'm starting to sense more is that like people or maybe it's just the feeds that I'm like or like that I see or whatever, but I feel like this is a really great time like for people to or I'll speak in I statements for me to say something, you know, in support, because I think that's a part of the fear, right? It's like that they're like fear tactics. And I feel like whatever, like I should be able to connect with people that know the specifics of what's going on, you know, and be able to share support, you know. And like for me, I just feel like, you know, the US needs to stay out of people, like the US is so intimately involved in all these wars, and I feel that that is a huge platform, like at least for me, just as like as who I am as an individual. Like I don't really like I, you know, I would love to better understand, and almost I always ask for like little scripts just because of my invisible disabilities. It's just easier if I'm able to speak to something and have talking points that I could then just like read off, because it just helps me. It's like an accommodation, you know, for me. But I want to thank you for your work, and I'd love to know, like, you know, just like what's verbiage, you know what I mean? Like I feel very compelled to say something to, you know, to my network, to my friends and family, you know, and others that I know on all platforms, because I think that's a part of it. You know what I mean? I think that like what I mean by that is a part of it is I think a part of it is not wanting to be seen a certain way, not wanting to and it's like who I don't care, like it's not like I don't care, because sometimes I feel like I am that teenager that starts to mouth off, you know, and I'm 41 years old. So but like I just, yeah, so thank you for your work, and I'd love, you know, you know, just to you know, connect with you or anyone who can help me think through like you know, what I want to say, and then like word it in an appropriate way.
For
Oh,
sure.
thank you.
I think, thank you for that. I think that your sort of hesitance and fear that you describe is perfectly valid. I think that people need to be properly educated on the issue before they're able to speak about it. And I think sometimes we have a tendency in like because before, you know, I've done Palestine organizing for years, but I've also before that just done leftist organizing. I think people really have a tendency to just automatically like be mad when someone like doesn't comment on something right away. And like I understand the need to feel like you need to know more and learn more before you're able to advocate. So I completely understand that. I think developing educational resources that are like, you know, accessible and that the public is able to understand as opposed to just academics, that's something we've really tried working hard on in PYM. So actually Jinan just put our email in the chat, but you're welcome to email us. We are trying to work more on like accessible educational resources, and hopefully, you know, we can help with that too. But I appreciate your input. So yeah, Akil.
I have a couple questions, but also thank you so much for joining us, Ibrahim. And I just wanted people to know where Stop LAPD Spying stands. You know, we have it in our statement of principles that we unequivocally support the Palestinian struggle against Zionism and Zionist colonialism and genocide. One question that or two questions that I have is, one is, would you be able to talk a little bit about so I know that the defense minister of Israel has recently issued a statement saying that, and it's not just a statement, but they're putting this in action. They're doing a complete blockade on Gaza, no food, no fuel, no electricity, and no water. And that he called Palestinians human animals. So you have that language, and then you have Palestinians resisting and they're being called Nazis. And then you have, as if like the perfect foil of this, you have what's going on in Ukraine. And I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit to the contradictions about this and like how people can make sense of this. And then second question is, I know PYM has a really unique analysis of the peace process, the so-called peace process, and the Oslo Accords, and the history that preceded the Oslo Accords of Palestinian resistance. And I was just wondering if you could share that analysis and share kind of how these events fit into that.
Yeah, thank you. Those are both great questions. Okay, so to start with the first one, so like I said, you know, the control, I mean, within Gaza, like, you know, Hamas is like the controlling authority, but Gaza itself, the entry and exit from Gaza is controlled entirely by the occupation. And so they have this discretion, which they of course always exercise if there's ever resistance, if anyone's ever trying to break out, or if there's ever any attempt at, you know, resisting, you're going to see them do this. But they essentially shut down everything. They shut down the power grid, they shut down the water. This is when we say it's really not an exaggeration to call the place, even because there's 2 million people in it, so it seems like a lot of people think it's probably a stretch to call it a prison. But you know, the way the fence is and the way the entryways, there's just no way to leave, right? So when Netanyahu said to people, I mean, this is where really the genocidal intent becomes clear, when he tells people on television, you know, go run, go hide, because we're gonna bomb, like leave. It's like he knows when he says that they can't leave, right? It's a statement being made, it's facetious. You know, and as far as the comments made by the defense minister, I mean, this is, you know, I mean, to compare it to the US, I mean, you know, population that is deemed undesirable or unwanted is going to be described in a way that is fundamentally racist, that is fundamentally dehumanizing. And, you know, Palestinians are not wanted by Zionists, right? And on the land, I mean, the goal is the elimination of the native, right? So there is this fundamental belief within Israel that is held by most Israelis about this superiority. Of course, there's different shades of it. You know, some people are not as explicit as the defense minister is, but the point of human animals, right? I mean, this belief justifies Zionism and justifies its violence. You know, it's why settlers are able to go to bed at night unconcerned about the fact that there's a prison camp miles away from them where people are starving. So you know, unfortunately, this is the reality. As far as why those comments would not be viewed, or why the media here treats that differently than, for example, Russia towards Ukraine, I mean, I think that is geopolitics. You know, the US is going to, because of geopolitics, like, and the US's extremely strong alliance with Israel, which, you know, we've talked about is an alliance that extends to the area of surveillance, and surveillance over Palestinians is surveillance over Americans. You know, the technology is tested, field tested first over there. I mean, because of this strong relationship, you know, US media is invested in minimizing these details and making them seem either trivial or just not, usually just not mentioning them, right? Today, white phosphorus was deployed on Gaza and on South Lebanon. White phosphorus is banned under international law. It's not allowed to be used in wartime. Was that on the New York Times homepage? No, the New York Times homepage was the music festival, right? So the point is, like, these are strategic decisions. Media is fundamentally strategic in terms of what people are focusing on and why, and the geopolitics of the situation tell you why, but the human situation is no different, right? When people are being bombed, when there's an attempt by a larger power to eliminate people, this logic of elimination, fundamentally there's no difference. It's just the sort of the elite in a society exercising kind of that ability to try to make people think a certain way. And then the second question about the peace process, yeah, I mean, we've developed a lot of internal curriculum around the Oslo Accords. I don't know how much people know, but essentially, since the implementation of the Oslo Accords, you know, in the past 30 years, there was an attempt to sort of pacify the Palestinian struggle, to sort of use this language of diplomacy as a cover for the slow sort of taking of land, right? So over the past 30 years, Israel has made these quote unquote offers to Palestinians. Of course, the offers are always to concede almost all Palestinian land and have no sovereignty. So they're not something that a nation of people would ever accept, right? But through this sort of mechanism, they're able to, you know, use this language of diplomacy to say, well, we tried, look, we offered them this, they refused, they keep refusing. And then through that to sort of justify their continued bombardment of Gaza and their continued growth of settlements in the West Bank. So this is the logic. This is sort of the strategy that they've used since the Oslo Accords. And it's been fundamentally aimed at depoliticizing our people, at making people either hopeless or feel like inch by inch, you know, things are getting taken and there's nothing people can do about it. Obviously, within the past 3 years, that's changed. I mean, the equation, you've seen it, you know, the equation has shifted. You know, Palestinians are not necessarily powerless like they were before, and the war is a lot more equal than it was before. And this is something where you know, the narrative of the perfect victim comes up, really, because whenever Palestinians start to gain ground and start to, you know, like reclaim settlements and get land back, all of a sudden they're no longer, people don't like them anymore because they're no longer these like perfect victims who are just sort of, you know, being brutalized. They've taken up arms and they're fighting back. So that narrative is really hard to challenge, but you know, we challenge it through alternative media, we challenge it through social media, we challenge it most of all in our communities through meetings like this. So, you know, we do what we can, and we've done a really like I think the narrative has shifted somewhat compared to 10 years ago, which is the result of organizing. That's it. I mean, without the organizing that's happened, the narrative would be the same. So yeah. Okay, Chella.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
My question kind of is similar. Well, it's more about the false news that's coming out, right? Or the like the fact that like of course American news is so focused on the Israeli side of like, oh my God, these people were just at a concert and they were, you know, this and that. Yet nobody was talking about the bodies that were being like literally I was watching Democracy Now. I've been watching Democracy Now since like 2018. And like literally almost every week there was a new body that was they would talk about. There was a new somebody had gotten from, you know, from the colonizer, you know? And I just want to know about like number one, false news and how to like and how to filter that on like, you know, with friends, you know, let's be real, with comrades or friends who aren't that well versed in this.
Right.
And number two, how do I also educate myself a little bit more? Because like there was that I liked what what's her name said about knowing some things but not knowing everything, right? Like, you know, it, yeah, that's just my question. I hope those are clear. If they're not, I can go ahead and but
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's really great. Give me just 1 second because I'm going to answer the second question first so that I don't forget. There are 2 resources I can give you if you want to sort of get a 101 education that we found to be really useful. One is a website called Decolonize Palestine that some people I know spent a really long time working on because of this exact reason. We just don't have until this, we didn't have like a place that we could just present our history, you know, on our terms and have people learn about, you know, the Nakba in 1948 and everything that happened that led to Israel's creation. until now. So that's one website that I would really encourage you to navigate and just read whenever you have maybe like, that's the good thing about it. You know, you can just read it's articles. So you can read one article a day. It's sort of a history. If you don't have time to kind of read through it all at once, but it's really useful. The PYM, we also have developed a reading list. I'm trying to find it. I will find it in a bit, but we have a committee in the org called the Popular University that's devoted specifically to this task of developing a set of resources that are accessible and that people can read from to learn history, culture, and the resistance, the history of the resistance also. So I think that's it. Wait, let me see. Yes, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. So those two are really good insofar as a place to educate yourself or direct other people. I encourage those. As to the first question with false news, that's a hard one. I'll give you an example. It's hard because Western media sources have a thing where they tend to entertain something for a while and then only dispel it once the damage is done. So, you know, this thing about like Hamas beheading babies, like 40 babies were beheaded. This was being shared across all social media. I have multiple people ask me if this was true. And then the IDF themselves came out today after the damage was done, basically, like this had been viral and spreading everywhere, saying, no, there's no evidence of actually, you know, that happening. Just as there had been a lot of discourse, which, you know, itself is rooted a lot in Orientalism, but this discourse of, you know, mass rapes occurring, which, you know, again, we have to keep something in mind here. Like, this is wartime, right? So there might be individual people who do abhorrent things, but this notion that there's at a mass level this sort of sexual violence happening that is somehow systematic or endemic to Palestinians or Arabs, right? These are really harmful narratives. And I think the two ways to combat that are, one, to just not accept everything right away you hear as necessarily true, like to dig a little deeper and wait a little to be sure before you're like confirm that something actually happened. And the second thing is to also kind of read history, read critical theory, whether it's like Edward Said or read people who talk about where these stereotypes come from, because a lot of them are rooted in this sort of colonial history of the savage and you know, it has a history. It's not, you know, without precedent. And again, like I said, at the same time, the perfect victim thing. I mean, when we talk about war, terrible things are going to happen, and there's going to be people who do abhorrent things, but those things are not systematic. They're not structural, right? We're not. Or the focus has to be on the context and the structural situation at large, right? So those are ways I think to sort of combat false news. And I think it's a lot easier to do with comrades, because people, like, when we assume best intentions and we're just all trying to figure out what's going on, like, it's a lot easier. I think with people who are skeptical or people who are, you know, not necessarily comrades, like, it can be a lot harder, and sometimes you have to let things go. I mean, it's hard for me sometimes to do that, but I also truly think, in my experience, there are people who are, the way I would put it is, committed to misunderstanding you. Like, you just like, you're really trying and you say it the best way you can, and you can tell that they get it, but they're just like, yeah, but you know. So like, my advice with that, honestly, is protect your energy. Like, if it gets to the point where you feel like someone's being like purposefully not trying to like be productive in the conversation, then, you know. But as far as people who really are just trying to understand more and know, I think that digging deeper and not automatically assuming and sort of developing a set of news sources that you find to be reliable, I think all that is necessary, and not just for Palestine, but for any issue that you organize about or that you think is of importance to your community. So yeah, I do have to kind of wrap up soon, guys. I'm really sorry. I just have to do something for work.
No problem.
But was this useful? I don't know. I feel like I was kind of just like, a lot of it was improvised. So, but yeah, I really hope that it was useful.
It was really useful. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. And I know that maybe Celine is on. I'm not sure, but if possible, could one of you drop the social media for? Actually, I can even just pull it up for PYM so people can follow. I can share that in the chat if you gotta go. But everybody, please follow PYM. And is that the best place to find out how to support PYMs through social media?
Yes, definitely. Our socials are really active, so you can message us or engage with us on there. But yeah, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon.
Cool.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you so much, Akil. And thanks everybody. We just want to wrap it up with some announcements. Just before we close out, this Saturday we have our Youth Day at the Park, our monthly Youth Day at the Park, and that's at Vista Hermosa Park at 10 a.m. And I'm gonna drop the Instagram post for that in a second. And again, we're gonna be at LAUSD at 3:30 p.m. on Tuesday, October 17th. And we don't have a flyer for that yet, but we will in a second. Any other announcements or comments from folks?
Yeah, oh sorry, Akil. I saw the link that he posted and the beautiful art of the Palestinian woman overlooking. I just want to uplift how the criminalization and demonization of people exists. And when I saw that, like my heart was just so warm. So I think it's just a good time to think through the beautiful people of Palestine through that lens, not through some scary, you know what I mean? It's like, if you come for my kids, guess what? Like, whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't gonna be cute. Like, so I just wanted to say that, just uplifting their art, and just they're not here, but thanking them for the beautiful imagery, because I needed to see that. I've been seeing all these scary pictures, and clicking on that and seeing a beautiful Palestinian woman was just centering.
Yeah, and I think that there's a reason why the Palestinian struggle, just like the Black American struggle, also is just like internationally around the world so resonant with so many different people. And that's like one, just the horrifically long nature of it, like how long people have been struggling for Black people. It's been 400, 500 years. But then I think also just the centrality of the struggle to US empire and the way that when they win liberation, everything will be overturned, you know? And I think that for me too, I feel that, Vanessa. Um, Also, sorry, much as you were doing announcements, I just wanted to quickly add that we do have our regular War on Youth working meetings too, the first and third Thursday of the month at 5 p.m. So the next one is October 19th as well. So you can have a whole week with us. Well, you can spend Saturday with us this Saturday, and then you can wait. Let me see if I got the dates right. Saturday with us this Saturday, and then Tuesday, and then Thursday again.
And Tuesday is the general meeting, which is in person at LA Kim,
All right. So if you wanted to add some more of us to your week.
October 17th at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Don't leave home without us.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Akil, for taking that beat. I'm sorry to have abruptly jumped into announcements. It sounds like people were still feeling some of the after effects of that conversation. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, if folks have any questions, email us at stop.lapdspying@gmail.com. Hope to see y'all Saturday. Bring your kids, or just show up, make a t-shirt. We make t-shirts. It's cool. Yeah, it's a good time. But see y'all real soon, I hope.